Hey everyone, I hope you're ready for this round of Grading the Avengers, because I'm about to rip this motherfucker a new one. This review is significant. There's a lot going on at once, and I have this rush of thoughts and feelings, just like last round. Because last round we had this big run with Jonathan Hickman. It lasted years, had all these tie-ins, and following it, Marvel was in a pretty good place from a creative standpoint. And it was decided that Avengers writing would be taken over by Mark Waid and a number of artists for a new series called All New, All Different Avengers. And here's where everything goes horribly wrong. Mark Waid is a fun writer with a lot of history in the world of comics. Waid had even written for the Avengers before, in round 13 for a few issues of the Avengers during the Onslaught saga. Those books weren't any good, but let's face it, given the circumstances of them, it didn't really matter who was writing it either. Mark Waid had also done guest spots in special issues of Avengers-related books by this point, quite a few in fact, and it felt like, on the whole, he wasn't a terrible choice to take over the Avengers, but one that, at the time, already feels a little dated. So I don't think the choice for him as an Avengers writer was a bad one on its own, not exactly. But I think he would have been more effective at his prime in the 90s, or at least that's what it feels like, when he was more fresh-faced. Nowadays, it instead feels like he's simply standing in the way of new talent at this point. I don't want to come down too hard on the writer, because I do like him, but no matter how you cut it, Waid was not a good choice for this particular roster of Avengers, to the extent it feels like just about any writer would have been better than him. That's a rough assessment, but this is one of the worst series of Avengers books ever put together. I suspect, without having any real evidence, to be clear, that Waid wasn't in charge of picking out who was going to be on this team. Looking over his body of work, he feels smarter than that, and would likely have opted for a more refined type of team. As we see in next round, that very much seems to be the case with another round of Avengers written by Mark Waid. But instead, here we have the worst roster of Avengers there's ever been. The entire existing team is largely dumped, with Iron Man and Vision only remaining. And while that's been done before, problems start compounding here. Sam Wilson returns to the team, but in his new moniker of Captain America, while Miles Morales, Kamala Khan, Sam Alexander, and Jane Foster all join the team as newcomers. And there's a lot wrong right out of the gate. The team feels alien, not only to us as readers and them as Avengers, but to each other. With no shared experiences common to the team, there isn't much of a drive or reason to root for these characters together. Individually, there is some history. Tony and Kamala know each other, these kids all know each other quite well, and there's this long history between Vision and Iron Man, obviously. But Vision is cold and indifferent in this story, deliberately so based on a baffling choice by Waid to make the character obviously evil at the very start of this series. And all that content largely devoted to the Avengers team dealing with this evil Vision. It heightens the sensation you get when reading these books of everything being wrong about the team. Jane Foster's Thor, by then carefully established by Jason Aaron to be a quiet, somber character, is inexplicably written as a happy-go-lucky and teen goofball, all while starting a romance with Sam Wilson that could very well be one of the worst written romances in all of Avengers history, were it not for all the troubles back in the 1970s. It is a confluence of bad, made only worse by stuff as simple as how this team gets together to begin with. They all just kind of awkwardly look at each other following their first adventure and just sort of agree to become the new Avengers, because that's the title of the book. It really doesn't feel like there's any other reason why the team would want to call themselves that, or why Tony thinks Miles, Kamala, and Sam are at all old enough or qualified to join the team. Don't get me wrong, we've consistently and certainly had new superheroes that are complete novices being taken in by the Avengers, and made a member of the team on the spot in the past. Usually, however, this is done incrementally, a new character here and there, and generally only one character at a time. Here, however, the established Avengers are completely outnumbered by the new Avengers. And not only that, they're teenagers, far younger than the average age of any Avenger across the team history. It feels borderline irresponsible for the adults to let these kids serve on a team that goes up against such high-level threats. Or at least, a team that should be going up against high-level threats. This team doesn't ever actually do much to begin with. When Peter Parker was that young, it was stuff like his inexperience and the age difference between him and the Avengers that often prevented him from joining the team for that reason. So it feels very hypocritical and borderline immature of the adult characters to agree to work with these children in this specific capacity, and nothing of the comics really addresses that. Instead, it's all just about the drama, this forced, stale drama. Vision undermines the team, there's this romance that makes no sense, and other goofy nonsense dominates the first 6 issues of this comic. There isn't really anything memorable in terms of a villain or a story at play here ever. It's all just about Vision being a bad guy. And from there we go right into a comic that introduces Nadia Van Dyne for some reason, then a series of tie-ins of crossover events dealing with stuff like Pleasant Hill and Civil War II, which are all pretty pointless issues that do nothing for this team. And that's it. I cannot stress how little there is in terms of content to these 15 books, an annual, and a couple of bonus issues. That's a lot of comic book pages, and they are utterly wasted. Earlier in Grading the Avengers, we talked about how Brian Michael Bendis wasted a lot of his time and potential with the team, but at least he had something in his books. Every once in a while you get a solid Bendis story, or at least some moment of entertainment value. But this whole series is a dud, from start to finish. These supposedly all-new, all-different comics, if anything, show off the worst traits of the 21st century modern Avengers, letting the story get consumed by this overwrought drama between team members, while we focus way too much on crossover stories, all while using diversity as a shield. Because now we have to talk about all this too. You'll notice I haven't even bothered to mention this was all part of an effort to supposedly make the Avengers more diverse. I say supposedly because if you want more diversity in the tone and nature of your Avengers, Mark Waid didn't really feel like a sincere choice to get us in that direction. This approach to diversity reflects how Marvel was going about things in their all-new, all-different period, wanting to use more diverse characters without addressing the systemic problems within the industry itself. They wanted to give the Avengers a new coat of paint, pat themselves on the back, and call it a day. Instead, they suffered intense backlash they've since used as an excuse to not invest in diversity as much, and through all of this, it seems as though nobody is aware or wanted to acknowledge the very real history the Avengers have of a long and awesome attempt to make the comic book industry more diverse. We've been careful to point that out along the way of this series, with Black Panther long considered a member of the team and now its current member, and Monica Rambeau thoroughly dominating the 1980s, to the extent she also eventually became a leader of the Avengers. This fake move towards diversity in 2016 felt inauthentic, forced, and a little dishonest given the Avengers' history. That Monica was nowhere to be found on the team in favor of Marvel's latest pet characters shows how little attention was paid to actual Avengers history, or lore. Marvel was focused on themselves and their own weird internal little goals, far too much to care what would have worked best for this team. And in addition to all of that, Mark Waid was certainly not given enough time to let the Avengers exist and grow as a team before the tie-ins took over. And what little time he did get, he wasted on a story where the Vision turned into a monster. Finally, the art felt wildly inconsistent and feels way too cartoony. Mahmoud Asrar, Adam Kubert, and Dave McCraig set a decent tone for an Avengers book in theory. It reminds me a lot of Bendis' proper Avengers run, but it doesn't work with whatever tone Mark Waid at least appears to be going for. It's very difficult to assess that though, at least not fully, because I have trouble discerning what this team wants to be and what direction it wants to go in. It feels like they should be more laid back and fun, in which case Kubert and Asrar's pencils, along with McCraig's bright coloring, would work for this series. But because Waid is all over the place in terms of tone, and it feels like the writing wants to be taken more seriously, while also just lacking a strong sense of identity in general, I have no idea what this team wanted to be, or how I'm supposed to feel. So it doesn't feel like any art would work with a comic like this. I mean, I know how the comic does actually make me feel. It makes me feel confused, angry, and bored. But that's not the intent of the book. I don't know what the intent of these books are. And that's a crazy thing to say about a full run of Avengers comics. The grade should be an F. In just about any other series, it would have gotten it and deserved as much. Unfortunately, with urine-soaked entries in Avengers history like the Jim Shooter era or Heroes Reborn, Mark Waid's run still feels meaningfully better than both eras. It's not so much the all-new, all-different Avengers are all that much better than Shooter's era or Heroes Reborn. It's just that they aren't quite as embarrassing. So I'm going to comfortably give it the D grade. It is much worse than Bendis or Johns, and absolutely the worst of anything Avengers in the 21st century, but across the team's entire history, it's not the absolute low point. All New, All Different Avengers was a disaster, of epic proportions. The kind that makes it not much of a surprise the series was cancelled and rebooted within a year. What is surprising is what followed, as Mark Waid returned as a writer. So we're going to give Mark Waid one final chance with the Avengers and see how it ranks against the rest of Avengers history. It's kind of his last shot at looking at all good in this series, so hopefully it goes a little better than this round. And if you're curious about that, find out next time on Comic Island.